All right, hello everyone to the weekly live stream. We're going to go over some news events, and then we're some shadow boxing as well, and then we're going to get into some Q&A, some questions, some answers, all that stuff. If you guys have any questions and you're in the chat, post them, and I'll star them. We'll get to them a little bit after we cover some news events, and a little bit before even that, we're just going to say that we're moving the show to Wednesdays. We're going to do Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So stay tuned for that. We'll be doing these weekly and having guests on every once in a while as well. So first news event that we'll talk about here, guys, is BlackRock has launched an ETP, which is very similar to an ETF in Europe. So they've covered Paris, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt. And this is a very similar product, like I said, to the ETF in America. So what are your guys' initial thoughts with this expansion of this this product that has been hugely successful for BlackRock, and now they're expanding into other markets and you know, getting Bitcoin exposure for the people there in those markets?
I think it's a great business opportunity for BlackRock if they're making a lot of money with it in the United States. And last I checked, it was the biggest ETF of all time. It just makes sense that they're going to do it in Europe, and they're going to do it in every other country that they can do it in. So I think that from a business perspective, this is an A+ move by BlackRock. That's exactly what I would be doing. From a Bitcoin perspective, or from a Bitcoiner's perspective, I would say not your keys, not your coins. Holding an ETF really isn't holding Bitcoin. I think holding an ETF is one of the worst ways that you can own Bitcoin, if you even consider it owning Bitcoin. So I would say from a business perspective, A+ for BlackRock. Hopefully it adds a lot more money coming into the market, gives a lot more people exposure. I think all of that is great. But if you studied Bitcoin for more than a week, you should know that's really not what Bitcoin's about. And self-custody it's going to be the best way to keep it safe.
Yeah, pretty much. And just to add on to that, there's going to be a few more older people who have a pension fund or whatever it might be. They already have some capital locked up. If they want some Bitcoin exposure, it might help a couple people out who want to go ahead and throw their money into some BTC via a proxy like an ETP or an ETF. But for the most part, I don't see this being anything super crazy. Obviously, the ETFs have been very successful in the US. I expect these to be successful as well by the European standards of ETP success, right? I expect them to probably go number one. But in terms of, individuals understanding the value proposition of Bitcoin, I don't think it changes too much of anything. More capital flowing into the system is natural. We're always going to see more and more people want more and more Bitcoin and more different financial products. So, good for BlackRock, but in the long term, I don't think it's anything too crazy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they perform, how much capital they do take in, if it's significant or not. I mean, there was a lot of hype about the launch of the Bitcoin ETF in Hong Kong, but it did pretty small numbers. Same with Australia, pretty small numbers. I mean, not completely insignificant. I mean, and it allowed individuals in those countries price exposure. I do also think that there's the possibility of these ETFs, when they perform so well, they'll hit the news cycle, and that will introduce new segments to the ideas of Bitcoin. And yeah, maybe they'll start with an ETF. Maybe they'll realize, hey, why am I paying an expense ratio for something that I can hold in self-custody? Maybe it'll lead to more Bitcoiners, not just Bitcoin IOU holders. The other question that I'm going to raise here, maybe specifically, or we'll start with you, Gen Z. A lot of foreign market is limited in their exposure to Bitcoin, and they actually get exposure to Bitcoin through something like MSTR. So do you think that we see more launches like this happening? Do you think that's maybe going to take away from some of the market share that MSTR has with these kind of captive buyers in foreign markets.
No, I don't think so. And Saylor talked about this himself, the fact that MSTR is not a Bitcoin ETF. It's a Bitcoin product, it's a Bitcoin proxy, it's a Bitcoin treasury company. And the reason why someone would want a treasury company over the underlying asset itself in the form of an ETF is that they want the volatility, they want the upside, they don't want to pay the expense ratio, right? So these are some of the reasons why. And I think that there's going to be more and more companies or countries or markets that start launching these Bitcoin products like an ETP, like an ETF. It's pegged 1-to-1 with Bitcoin, but they're not going to draw in as much capital as they might think. If they're building it with the intention of taking some of the foreign investment that MSTR is seeing, I think they're going to be disappointed, right? Really, what they're going to be seeing is trapped capital that is looking for some Bitcoin exposure. They might get a little bit there, but I don't think they're going to be taking much of the market share away from strategy.
Interesting. Dan, did you have anything else to add to that last point there before we move on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree completely. I think that there's definitely a bull case for master or for strategy, where the idea of putting Bitcoin on leverage and having that in a company like strategy could be good. But I can also imagine that there might be some institutions that are willing to pay the BlackRock fees to have it in an ETF also. So I don't know what those numbers would be. I don't know what the percentage would be, but I can definitely see some money flowing from strategy out to these ETFs. That being said, if these ETFs go ahead and make the market bigger as a whole, it could end up in a net positive for strategy as well. So it could go down, it could go up. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see, because I guess I could play out the bull and bear case either way.
That's a good point. I like that point. How like if they just cause more buying pressure, that's going to elevate strategy's price anyway. Even if there is maybe some marginal outflows to these ETFs, overall, it's going to still be more buying pressure to Bitcoin, which is the accelerant to strategy's price. It's kind of an interesting system they've set up where it's almost like they can't lose in that way.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, MicroStrategy holding as many Bitcoin as they have, it seems like it's obviously going to grow a lot faster than most other companies, just because the underlying asset is going to grow a lot faster than most companies. So I think just the fact that MicroStrategy has the Bitcoin, they're in a situation where they're going to win.
Totally. Yeah. No one's going to beat their Bitcoin pile. That's for sure. So we'll move on to the next story here, guys. GameStop's Bitcoin investment. So on March 25th, they announced their Q4 earnings. And then subsequently, they actually announced that they were going to do a convertible bond offering of $1.3 billion, all with the kind of presumption that they're going to use that money to buy Bitcoin. And in the Q4 earnings, they unanimously, the board voted to allow Bitcoin on as a treasury reserve asset. Love to get your guys' thoughts just on, is this another corporate company buying Bitcoin? What is this going to do? Is this another domino? Will there be knock-on effects of this? Is this a big deal that GameStop is buying Bitcoin or going to buy Bitcoin?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but last I checked, when Strategy started buying Bitcoin, they started buying Bitcoin with the cash that they had. Is that accurate? And I thought that was a fantastic play. I thought that was the smartest thing Michael Saylor could have done. AMC isn't doing that, right?
Well, we're not sure. They haven't actually published any buys yet. They have $4.7 billion of cash, but they've also raised this convertible bond. So we're not sure if they're going to use some of their cash reserves or this bond. We don't know. Yeah, you are right that Strategy did buy initially with the cash that they had built up from being a business for 20 years, and they were just sitting on this cash. So yeah, they're maybe just hopping over that beginning strategy and going straight to the convertible bond debt offering to buy Bitcoin. We're not sure.
Okay. So for me personally, I would feel more bullish on AMC if they were just taking the cash that they had and buying Bitcoin with it. The fact that they're doing the same playbook as strategy, if I am an investor and I am choosing one of those two companies to invest in, what would be the advantage of buying AMC over MicroStrategy if they're following that exact same playbook? Because right now, strategy seems to have the network effect. Strategy seems to have, or not seems to, they have more Bitcoin, and they seem to have a leader that understands Bitcoin better. I actually have no idea how well the CEO of AMC understands Bitcoin, but he hasn't been nearly as public as Michael Saylor, let's say.
Just a correction there. It's a GME is their ticker. AMC, you're thinking of the movie cinemas. It's
I'm sorry. Yeah,
That's all right.
so GameStop, not AMC. I know those two were hand
They
in
do
hand.
run in the same circles. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the correction.
Yeah, of course.
No, AMC is up next. All right. They're not starting yet, but I'm sure they will. Because I mean, what else are they gonna do? Right. And I think you're right. You know, the market is not really first off, they're already skeptical. All right. Just because they're raising the debt for all this stuff, they could use it for operations regarding the business that are not necessarily buying Bitcoin. Right. Again, the cash on hand. I think people want to see that cash being deployed, and it can be. You know, so what we could see is they offer the 1.3 billion. It gets upsized to 1.5 billion because the market is just hungry for these convertible notes. They perform so well. And then we see them deploy some of their cash or all their cash and the money that they raise with the convertible notes. They could pull off something crazy. They could do the biggest Bitcoin buy in all of history and do a $6 billion buy all at once. I highly doubt that they do that, but they would make history. They would make headlines, and that would be hard to beat. In terms of comparing GME to MSTR, yeah, they do have a CEO who understands Bitcoin a lot better, right? Strategy does have way more Bitcoin than them. Strategy has a longer track record than them. Strategy is highly transparent, all right? He's not trying to trick people or dupe people. He says what he's going to do, and then he goes ahead and he does it. So there's a lot of uncertainty around GME. Me personally, because of that uncertainty, I think that there's a great opportunity here. If Ryan Cohen follows through with the strategy playbook to a T, then he could blow his company up majorly in a short amount of time. But right now, the market is doubting him. He needs to quell all of those doubts by putting his money where his mouth is and going 100% into BTC.
So Gen Z and for both of you guys, if I give you guys $5,000 or $10,000, how are you dividing that up in between strategy, Bitcoin, and GME?
Oh man, that is so good. Let's just keep it easy with 10. All right, so we've got 10 racks. I'm gonna do two scenarios. Okay, the safe version and the really safe version. If you want to just guarantee you maintain your capital, you want to do maybe 80% into BTC, so it's 8,000, and then 10% into MSTR, 10% GME. I think that's super safe, right? And you're mostly going with the least amount of counterparty risk there.
So you're doing equally strategy and equal GME.
That's my safe analysis.
Okay.
My more risk, hungry analysis would be, you might go somewhat less than 50% BTC. Maybe let's call it 40%, right? Then you would want a larger position in MSTR shares, and then a smaller position in some GME options potentially that are dated out maybe 2 years, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because currently GME's priced very low, and we could see massive rips up in a very short time period if they do the thing that I'm talking about, like going all in into Bitcoin, right? Because the market does not think that they're going to do that. All right, they are highly doubting them. With strategy is a long-term play. You could do the options thing there as well, but at the end of the day, people are going to look back and they're going to say, wow, I wish I had shares in that company because they've done so many splits. The stock has gone up so much. I think that's what we're going to see with MSTR for sure. And GME, it might be one of those things where you buy some call options, you watch the pop. Okay, the implied volatility goes absolutely crazy. This increases the value of your options in a short time frame, And you might watch your position go from a 20% of your 100% portfolio that might grow to like 40 or 50% just because of how quickly options can get out of control. That's just my personal opinion.
Oh, you're muted, Dan.
So what are you going to do with all the extra money that because you work, right? You have a job, you're putting money in, I presume, every week or every paycheck. How are you going to do it? Like, not based on safe scenario, not safe, risky scenario. Like, what are you going to do?
My personal this is what I am doing. DCA into Bitcoin every single day, right? And then with what I have left, I'm stacking some MSTR. And recently I did buy some GME options that are way out of the money, right? That expire in 2027. Because after that massive dip that happened, I think it was sometime last week when they announced the convertible note thing, the market doesn't understand what's happening. All they read is that GameStop is raising debt to potentially buy this risky thing called Bitcoin. We don't really understand it. The stock dumps like 25%, which means that the options dump 75%. I just got a 75% discount on some options that don't expire until 2027. You know what I mean? So I went ahead, just put like $1,000 into that. That's awesome. You know, I've got a lot of time on that. There is the intrinsic time value on those options. I have plenty of time. And I believe that Ryan Cohen can make his move between now and 2027. And if he does do that, we could see a MSTR type of run up. Really, we need volatility from Bitcoin, which right now the volatility has been near zero, you know, in my opinion. It's kind of been flat, you know. And two, it's kind of been to the downside when it is volatile. Once Bitcoin has a rip back up to 109K, 110K, 115K, that's when we're going to see the fruits of all this labor, the planting the seeds, you know, buying the MSTR shares, buying options. Until then, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, but when you know the future, you're ready for that.
Dan, I wanted to get back to something you asked. Your first question actually was why would somebody want to buy either MSTR or GameStop, and what are the comparison between the two? I think one thing that I think of course, is market cap size. So you have a higher. I mean, I would just look at GME as more speculative than MSTR, partially because of market cap. So GME has like a $12 billion market cap. MSTR has like an 80 billion, something around that. The numbers aren't exact. So if there was an upside potential, or if there was like a lot of interest in GME, that stock price is going to move a lot faster than MSTR because of the size of it. The other thing too is there's already a lot of volatility in GME's stock, and we've seen MSTR really capitalize on the fact that they have a volatile asset that's tied to Bitcoin's volatility. So if GME was to tie itself to Bitcoin's volatility, and they have their own volatility, which is already really high, they would be able to offer similar products as MSTR is doing, and they would be worth a lot of money, or they would be able to basically get really, really cheap financing to acquire Bitcoin. So that's maybe why they were already able and really rushed into offering something like a convertible bond, because a convertible bond has a lot of value if there's a lot of volatility in the underlying stock. So if this was a non-volatile company that was getting into this, they would have to buy Bitcoin with the cash they had, because they wouldn't be able to do a convertible bond that anybody would be interested in, because there's no volatility in the stock until it ties itself to the Bitcoin. But yeah, so to me, GME is definitely a lot more speculative than MSTR, but those would be maybe some reasons why somebody might want to buy GameStop over MSTR.
So are you basically summing it up as higher risk, higher reward?
Kind of, yeah. That's really a simple way to put it. And you can kind of dissect what those risks are. The other risk too, like there's people that are still waiting on the sidelines to even see if GME actually buys Bitcoin. Like they're not convinced yet. To me, that's part of the opportunity. To me, it's like, it's pretty clear they're buying Bitcoin. I'm just going to buy now because I don't expect the price to dip much lower than this. And I actually did buy 100 shares, real small position. And I have an option that I'm way down on that I bought long ago when Ryan Cohen first posed in a picture of Saylor. But I'm just going to hold it, see what happens. Who knows? It might go up.
Small position, he says. All right. That's what happens when you're a big time YouTuber.
So, I mean, I guess I'm just really hoping that Bitcoin shoots up and it goes really volatile and both of you guys make millions of dollars or get super rich with GME and strategy. I think that would be a win for all of us.
Yeah, I think so too. Roll that into Bitcoin is the idea at some point. These are the new shit coins, right? In my opinion, these are the new shit coins. I mess with Mara, I mess with MSTR, I mess with options. This is all underlying that is all Bitcoin, which I believe in. I don't have to believe in some bullshit technology of DeFi, crypto nonsense to try to outperform Bitcoin. I can believe in a company trying to acquire more Bitcoin, which I already understand and believe in. So to me, it makes a lot more sense trading these things and speculating and gambling basically in the idea that they might outperform Bitcoin in some period of time.
Yeah.
So I can acquire more Bitcoin.
This is an important question I have for both of you guys. What would be the top signal for both of you for GME and for strategy where you want to start converting your stocks into Bitcoin? Or do you think that there is no top signal?
Yeah, and that's hard to do when you're not a seasoned, options trader or whatever. But for me, I'm just gonna try to ride the wave as long as I can. Again, I have a lot of time on these options. I don't want to buy options that only have 6 months on them. You know what I mean? I want options that have like 2 years. You know what I mean? A year and 6 months on them. I have some of the December 17th, 2027 options. That's a lot of time. These options have a lot of intrinsic value installed into them. But one thing that we do see with Bitcoin typically is we see a massive run up and then we see a consolidation. So if I was to try to trade this rather than just hold it, I'd want to see, again, another massive run up, maybe a 20%er, 25%er. And then once we start to see a little bit of that consolidation for a couple of weeks, then maybe I transition into something else and then go back in. But because they have so much time on them, I want to just hold these options for as long as possible. My shares, I want to hold my shares for a really long time. I want to hold my Bitcoin forever. So
Same.
there might come a point where I'm like, you know what? I think the bull market might be running out of steam. We're at the end of 2025. Things are up. We're at 250K. It's December, and maybe now we're getting ready to cool off. I might shred a couple of my options at that point and then get ready to roll them into BTC. I might have some cash on the side, get ready for a little bit of a dip, maybe a bear market, whatever it might be. Then I'd go ahead and roll that into BTC. A lot of different ways to play it. Me personally, I'm going to try holding everything for as long as possible.
All right.
So to answer that, I'm not looking for top signals. I am systematically selling as the price goes up of the underlying and de-levering out of things because options are leverage. So I would first start stripping those down in my portfolio, start removing those from my portfolio at certain price points or certain percentage gains. But mostly I'm looking at price points of underlying shares. And then for my shares, again, I'm looking at certain price points, and then looking for volatility spikes, and then I sell covered calls on those. And if those expire in the money and my shares get removed, I just consider that a good time to exit that position, and I roll all of that into Bitcoin, or maybe if I'm really thinking that there is a top and I'm seeing other signals at that point, maybe into a cash position, waiting and buying at a better opportunity. That's my strategy.
All right. I can't wait to see it work for you guys. It's going to be great.
Yeah, let's hope.
And everyone in the chat, because I know there's a lot of strategy and soon to be GME holders here. So I just want you guys to win.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Before we move on really quickly,
Yes.
Work Save Bitcoin. Love the new profile picture. Looks very nice. And if you could pull up this comment by Tommy Twista, he actually has a very good comment here where he says that, I'm catching up on the stream. So I'm a little bit behind. I disagree. Self-custody is safer than ETF. Many more people have lost their keys or had BTC stolen because of self-custody, even if ETF is not pure BTC. And that's a pretty good point. At the end of the day, It's not necessarily safer, I would say, but when you hold your own keys, there's no counterparty risk. The counterparty is yourself. It depends. Are you telling people about your Bitcoin? Are you telling people that you self custody? Are you losing the little paper that you wrote your keys down on? It's really on you. Whereas with an ETF, you're introducing a layer of trust into the system, and that's why a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners don't necessarily like the ETF, because Satoshi himself talked about the issue with fiat money, government issued money, is that all the trust that's needed in order to make it work. And it's up to you. If you're maybe an older person, you're not super tech savvy. Not that self custody is that difficult, but if you really feel like you can't do it, then yeah, an ETF might be the way to go, and that might be a little bit safer for you. But I feel like the majority of people on Earth, if you grew up with email and a cell phone and social media, you can self custody. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and that was a great point. I'm going to add on to that a little bit. A lot of the people that lost their Bitcoin in self-custody, the reason why they lost it is because Bitcoin was so early, they didn't actually think it was worth anything. Most of these people had it on hard drives before HD wallets even existed. HD wallets are essentially the 12-word seed phrases. And when they lost it, they thought it was just fun, maybe like buy some drugs with that money. And nobody actually thought that it would work. Nobody actually thought that it was going to be worth what it's worth today, or it's going to go in the trajectory that it's going in. So there is a point, you can lose your seed phrase, but a lot of people also lose a lot of Bitcoin in with external custody. And case in point, look at Voyager, look at Celsius, look at FTX. All of those companies were custodying other people's Bitcoin. And I think maybe even some of us, in the comment section lost a lot of money there. So, there we go. So there's always going to be risk with everything. And that's why I always say, we actually talked about this last week. There was a really good question in the comments. But when you're going to start moving over your Bitcoin to self-custody, I said, do it slowly. Make sure you feel comfortable with everything. The biggest way to lose money in self-custody is to rush into it without understanding at first. It does take a little bit of time, but it's worth it in the long run. And then Tommy Twista added this comment. He says, those aren't ETFs, which are insured. So ETFs are insured. No, it is impossible to have insurance based in Bitcoin for anything like that. They might be insured with dollars, but you're not going to get your Bitcoin amount back. Case in point, with FTX, when they went out of business, went bankrupt, and everybody got their money back, the way that they said it was that everybody got more than they had at the time. So, but in Bitcoin terms, they actually lost a lot of money. So they got more dollars than they had, but they lost most of their money in Bitcoin in Bitcoin terms. So I don't think that's really a fair argument. But do what you want. I'm not your financial advisor. Whatever, it's better to have it. It's better to have ETFs than to not have any Bitcoin at all.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it's a hard comparison to make, because what we're kind of saying, what the custody solutions that we had before these ETFs were like exchanges, and that is a form of custody, right? You're allowing that exchange to hold your coins for you, and you expect to get those at some point, right? If you do take self custody, but we've seen a lot of people lose Bitcoin through exchange failure. And the other thing too is, it's not like the custody isn't happening, right? It's just somebody else is looking after the custody. Even with the ETFs, they still have probably like a multi-sig setup. Maybe they have different custodian situations within there. Yeah, they probably have some fiat type insurance for certain amounts of it. There's all sorts of, it adds a lot of complexity, but I think the risk, right, is the self-custody risk it's risk to your own Bitcoin, and it would be catastrophic to yourself if something happened to that. But the risk to this giant honeypot of Bitcoin would be catastrophic to so many people that hold Bitcoin through these IOUs. And it would have to be like a massive event, and it would be insane. So it would be like a big blow up experience, kind of like what FTX was, which we haven't seen. So we don't know. I think a lot of risk is like the risk of uncertainty, where if you hold self-custody Bitcoin yourself, you know what the risks are. You know that the risks might be you or how you've stored your private keys or whatnot. So you can kind of control the risks. Whether one thing is more risky than the other is really just perspective and situation and everything like that. So it's really, it's a good question. It's kind of a good topic because it's nuanced, and there isn't really like a proper answer, but I think it really comes down to the individual, where certain situations will be more risky than others, and custody solutions could be the right situation, or even just temporarily could be the right situation. So it is a good topic in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's there's points to both. So I think you just got to learn about it and do what's right for you.
Yeah, exactly. And Tommy just said that's a good point. However, FTX and exchanges weren't very regulated, which is exactly why it's not an exact comparison to what we have now with ETFs. But ETFs have the risk of being a newer situation as well. So there's maybe some unseen risks that we're not certain of as time progresses.
And isn't Coinbase the custodian for most of the ETFs? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think like 8 out of 11 or something. Or yeah,
I know Fidelity
Coinbase
has
Prime.
their own.
Yeah,
but, I mean, Coinbase is an exchange, so.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they're still custodying it in some way. And you could self-custody it in the exact same way as Coinbase custodies all the Bitcoin for them or for other people, right? You could have, multi-sig, different jurisdictions. You could be extreme with your self-custody and make it extremely safe. So there is that option as well. But yeah. Do you guys want to get to the next news thing here? Let's talk about let's skip the price movement one. I know people are interested in the price, but basically Bitcoin went down like 6% in the entire week, traded sideways and all this, and that's about it. I don't know how much there is to really talk about price. That's
think
all I can say about it.
If you are only into Bitcoin for the price and you only think about the price, I think my best advice would be to learn more about it because I think it's so much bigger than that. Not saying that price isn't important. It obviously is important. It's a sign of how successful it's being. But I mean, it's not going to win because of the price. It's going to win because it's an entire network that's free from any governments, and it's open to everyone, and it's neutral, and it's the best thing ever.
Yeah, and the price right now, it can be looked at as like all the other global macro stuff going on, tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and risk on assets getting affected, all this kind of stuff. So I mean, it's all that jazz in my opinion. By the way, chat, I'm starring a lot of these questions, so don't think we're not going to get to them. We will get to your questions, so keep asking them, and eventually we will get to them. We're just kind of going to blaze through a couple more of these. Actually, there's just basically one more here that I thought was interesting. So Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. are going to establish American Bitcoin, which aims to become the world's largest and most efficient Bitcoin miner. And they're partnering with Hut 8, which is a public Bitcoin miner, and they hold an 80% stake, while the Trump-affiliated American Data Centers retains 20%. And Eric Trump will serve as the chief strategy officer, emphasizing the venture's growth potential. The announcement led to a 4% rise in Hut 8's shares shortly after the market opened. What's your guys' thoughts on very politically situated people like this getting into mining Bitcoin, and maybe there being more movement from the U.S. politics to move into Bitcoin mining?
I think that this is going to be something very interesting, very awesome. I'm a business partner with Hut 8, so I love this. This is amazing. And really, what this is going to continue to show, this is nothing new, but it's going to continue to show, hey, this is actually a budget neutral way of acquiring Bitcoin. All right. You can mine Bitcoins for free. You just have to have an upfront cost, right? Which is building out the infrastructure, whether that's using stranded hydropower, solar power. They keep talking about building out American nuclear infrastructure using nuclear power to mine, right? There's an upfront cost, right? But then once you look at how Bitcoin is able to generate value over time, right? Look at Bhutan, the country of Bhutan. They mined all their Bitcoin. They didn't buy any. And of course, it cost money to build the data centers, but it didn't cost 17,000 BTC to build the mining centers, right? So those paid for themselves. They were free. All that money was free. And people are going to start to realize, oh, this is actually a really good way of subsidizing clean energy. It's a good way of subsidizing grid infrastructure and building out the grid, stabilizing the grid. There's so much stuff we can do with this. So I think it's awesome, that we're building American industry. We're building Bitcoin mining in America. We need to continue this trend because the rest of the world, they're ramping it up and they're not necessarily talking about it every day. All right. Bhutan came out and publicly announced that they've been mining since 2019. All right. So they've been doing this. How many other countries are already mining? They just haven't announced it. Right. So it's a good idea and I support it 100%. I think it's going to be great.
I guess I'll take the opposite take on that one. One of the things with Bitcoin mining, the way that it works, working on an equilibrium, it's never going to be too profitable for anyone. As soon as it starts getting too profitable, it's going to become harder to do and it will naturally become less profitable. It is always going to be only profitable enough for some people to keep the lights on with Bitcoin. It's never going to get too profitable. So do I think it's good that we're mining Bitcoin in the United States? Yes. Do I think Bitcoin can do a lot of things to help stabilize the grid, help grow the grid, help expand electricity usage and just expand electricity generation in the United States? Yes, but from a pure economic standpoint of how much money is it going to make, I am less convinced.
So because of the cost of the electricity, not even just the ASIC the ASIC miners and the warehousing and stuff would all be part of that expense as well. But you're saying it would be better, like if say the U.S. government wants to acquire a bunch of Bitcoin, are you saying it would just be better for them to just buy Bitcoin on the market than to mine it themselves?
I mean, it depends on how cheap they can get the electricity from. If they can get electricity really cheap, then it's going to be better for them to mine it. If they cannot get the electricity cheap, then it's going to be better for them to buy it. In that sense, it works the same as you and me. If we can get electricity cheap, we're better off mining it too. And if we can't, then we're just better off buying.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that. We're going to see them try to emphasize because Hut 8 is already pretty efficient at mining Bitcoin. They're going to continue to make machines that hash faster, right? That are more energy efficient, right? And again, going into places where we can find as much stranded energy, cheap energy, free energy as possible. Otherwise, it really won't make sense. I think that they're going to continue building this infrastructure. And again, if this becomes a government initiative, right? If this becomes something that politicians are working to subsidize, like, hey, we're going to subsidize Bitcoin mining. We're going to really bolster Bitcoin mining. They might find new ways to, again, efficiently mine Bitcoin. They might give the green light to go and set up infrastructure in certain places to make sure that they're the, green leaders or the cheap energy leaders, right? So that way, these companies, especially if they're, closely tied to the current administration, that these are the most successful companies in the country. They're probably going to do whatever they can to give them the edge because the sons of Donald Trump are involved in this project.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is the part of the way Bitcoin miners become profitable is if they sign these electricity buying agreements, and then the grid actually ends up needing electricity that the miners are technically allocated to, and the miners can actually sell back part of their contracted energy at a profit. So they can actually shut down their miners and sell the rights to the electricity back to the grid at a profit, which is crazy. And this especially happens at places with not necessarily stranded energy, but excess electricity. So a nuclear power plant, for instance, generates a huge amount of electricity, and there isn't always that demand for it. So the Bitcoin miners can step in as demand, and then they can shut down when the grid demands it. And same with hydroelectric dam, right? And in my eyes, it's like, if the miners can become efficient enough, and I think there's a key point here with the government, where they've really pressed on the budget neutral, or like the no cost to taxpayers. If they're able to swing Bitcoin mining into a thing where it's like, this doesn't cost us anything, and we're getting Bitcoin at whatever price it costs to mine it, that even if it ends up being costing them more over time, because it's not like you're given that Bitcoin right away. You're put into a lottery, so it takes time to acquire Bitcoin through Bitcoin mining. But if they're able to swing it as a budget neutral way, this might be an effective way for them to acquire Bitcoin, where they wouldn't be allowed to in just like a straight up forward way.
So I guess, can you guys explain to me the logic of this being budget neutral? Because that's maybe where I'm having a disconnect. Yeah, just explain that a little more.
Yeah, I actually, that's part of the thing that I would struggle with too. But one thing that comes to mind is, if they're to partner with a company and they have some sort of state-sponsored energy project that they own, they could offer that as the resource, and the private company could use that resource to mine Bitcoin, and they revenue share off of that from the amount of Bitcoin that the private company has mined with public energy source. And in that way, it would be budget neutral, because the private company has put up the infrastructure for the Bitcoin mining. That's the only way that I've thought of this being budget neutral, but I don't know, maybe there's other ways too.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if the United States can figure out a way to get the energy cheaper than everyone else, then it's going to be a great win for the United States. And if they can't, they're just going to be mining Bitcoin not at a profit. And that's just how Bitcoin mining works.
Yeah,
True.
one thing I'll say about this is, let's just say hypothetically, the upfront cost to build a completely new facility in somewhere like Texas, which is where most Bitcoin miners are located. You'll go ahead, build out the infrastructure. That's $10 million upfront. That is not budget neutral. That costs $10 million. Then from there, you mine Bitcoin for cheap electricity. The price of Bitcoin is appreciating. You're getting more Bitcoin over time. Eventually, the amount of Bitcoin that you have, even though you're selling to continue to offset the cost of electricity, right? Eventually, your Bitcoin holdings exceeds 10 million. Then every Bitcoin mined past that point is a budget neutral, I guess, Bitcoin mined, right? Because now you're at a profit. You've already paid off the upfront cost of the facility, right? Let's say it's costing you, I don't know, $50,000 maybe a day to run the facility, because of the amount of energy that you're using. But on the whole, you're generating $90,000 a day, $100,000 a day in revenue, because you're mining blocks, right? At least right now, each block that you mine is like $288,000, and that number is going to keep going up. That number always goes up. Even though we have halvings, each Bitcoin kind of accounts for that halving offset, right? So in the future, once you've paid off your upfront cost, you're now generating Bitcoins at a gain, right? This is why Bitcoin mining companies stay in business, even though it is very cutthroat. If you cannot get to that like 2 cents per kilowatt hour, 1 cent per kilowatt hour, you're not going to make it. But of course, the United States has an incentive to try to get that super cheap energy, to make sure that eventually you have a budget neutral way of printing up Bitcoins. Really, it's budget positive.
I think that part, it would be hard to swing the initial infrastructure cost as not as it not being. Wait, I'm getting tripped on my double negatives here. It'd be hard to swing it as something that is budget neutral when it's initially costing them something. So that part I have trouble to wrap my head around, and I think it would be hard for them to really sell that to the public when they've said they're not going to. It's not going to cost anything. But yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fair. You know, they could maybe do a partnership with a company that already exists, kind of like what we're seeing with Hut 8, like able to take a 20% stake. Not exactly sure how they'll do it, but at the end of the day, you know, if Bitcoin mining wasn't profitable at all, we'd see no companies doing it. It just takes time, and you have to make sure you have the right setup.
Yeah. So
True.
the one thing I want to make sure we're all on the same page is there's not really economies of scale in Bitcoin mining. Do we agree with that? Is that something that you guys both agree with?
I would say that the US
Or that the
is
economies of scale are negligible or very, very little. And the reason why is because each Bitcoin or the way that Bitcoin works, right? It's by computation. It's how much computing power do you have? You have your one miner, and one miner costs more or less the same for everybody. And then after that, it's just how much energy or how cheap energy you can get to power your to power your miner. So if you can get 1 million miners, the upfront cost would be 1 million times the cost of one miner, right?
I mean, roughly, yeah. And like to say like economies of scale, I would say the United States is very much a heavy Bitcoin miner. They're not necessarily subsidizing or owning the machines, but US companies are strongly driving Bitcoin mining, which is why Foundry USA is such a big mining pool. But China is also an economy of scale because their Bitcoin mining pool is also massive. And even though they keep saying stupid stuff like, oh, we're banning Bitcoin mining, you know, that's never really true. China has a lot of the hash power.
Yeah, I guess I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that there's no real economies of scale in Bitcoin mining. Or so the idea of basically at the end of the day, I just don't see Bitcoin mining as a really good business opportunity. It is a good business opportunity for some people, and that is just mostly dependent on the cost that they can get energy at.
So you're talking. So I would argue maybe different. I think there is some economy of scale for the purchase of ASICs. So if you're to do a massive big purchase of a lot of ASICs, you're going to get a discount. So there's that. So maybe that doesn't isn't a huge factor, but there's also the economy of scale of being able to be an energy buyer and saying we can buy as much energy as you have extra, and we can get a really good rate because we're going to buy a lot of energy.
So you're saying that the economies of scale come in when these Bitcoin mining companies set up private deals with energy suppliers where they can get Bitcoin for cheaper. That's where the economies of scale really come into play. Is that the argument?
That's my argument. I don't have proof of that. I haven't actually even looked into that. That's just my initial thinking of that. But yeah, that's where I would see it because we have no ability as individuals. If I'm to plug in a miner into my wall here, I'm just getting whatever rate I get from the electricity company. But if I'm actually able to have some negotiating power, that is a factor of the scale of my need for electricity.
Okay. Well, in that specific situation, I would agree with you that would be a benefit of an economy of scale. So we are in agreement there. I am just not sure. I guess that's a really good thing to ask. Maybe somebody in the chat knows what is the discount that Bitcoin miners can get with their specialized deals. I would love to know because if that is accurate, then that truly is a benefit of economy of scale.
I think it is accurate. As far as what I've seen a little bit of, Mara is averaging like 5 cents a kilowatt in the US, which is because they're the biggest miner. They can get all these contracts. They can outbid the other miners. The other miners are competing for different contracts and all of this. But I think there is a bit of economy of scale with that. It would be interesting to look more into it. And yeah, if anybody had any additional information, feel free to hit that in the chat for sure.
Great topic. Yeah, I think Bitcoin mining is super important. So it's really good that we're discussing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get to some questions here. If we don't have anything else here. Here's a good one. Do you think GME can ever get more Bitcoin than MSTR? I have an answer for this, but I'll let you guys ride with this question first.
Unlikely. Master just has so much.
Yeah. The truth is, it is really too late. MSTR might have more Bitcoin in the United States, if I'm being honest, because if you don't act now, you're going to be too late. If you're not first, you're last. And GME is not acting first. Every time they buy a Bitcoin, they are paying Michael Saylor. They work for Michael Saylor. Every time Michael Saylor buys a Bitcoin, he's working for me. So when you're a little bit late to the party, then you have to kind of try to ride the coattails of the people ahead of you. It's very difficult to try to outscale a company like MicroStrategy or Strategy, especially when they have so much Bitcoin already and they have so much ability to generate more cash in order to buy more Bitcoin, right? GME's market cap is a little bit too small. I don't think they can ever catch them. But I do think within the next 2 years, if they go unbelievably hard, like 100% everything they got, they could easily get to above 50,000 Bitcoins easily.
Yeah, and I think they, if they went all in, we've actually seen the past week here, MSTR bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and they did not noticeably move the market. I mean, I'm sure they moved the market in some ways that it just wasn't detectable because there's so much other money moving in the Bitcoin market. So, I think it would be a different story if GME fully ported all of their cash into it, because that's going to be about 6 billion at this point. So I think that would move the market. But that's actually a good sign to show how liquid the Bitcoin market is, because liquidity is incredibly important for people with huge amounts of money. They don't want to actually move the market when they get in and out of positions. To answer this question, though, something catastrophic, so something incredibly unlikely and catastrophic would have to happen to MSTR for GME to ever get more Bitcoin than them. And again, that is incredibly unlikely. And that's the only situation where they would ever have more Bitcoin than MSTR. We talked about options earlier in the show here. Any opinion on IBIT options? I guess this goes to Gen Z, the options buyer out there. Have you looked at IBIT?
I have, and my opinion, there's just really no reason for me to do that. For one, the dates do not go out as far as I'd like, and for two, the implied volatility is a little bit lower, and that's not really what you want to see in options. The IV has to be higher in order to have a higher, price per contract. So I like to get into things more like MSTR and again GME options, which I think are very underpriced currently because the market doesn't believe GME will go all in on BTC. And once that's proven to not be true, once they do go all in, I think those options will explode because the price will explode.
I think there's an argument that, we talked about how there's a lack of volatility currently with Bitcoin. And there seems to be more volatility in these Bitcoin proxies because they're a little bit more unpredictable. They're Bitcoin plus, did Saylor buy $1 billion or did he buy 100 million, or what's he doing and what's this, and that creates volatility because there's uncertainty on top of it. So in my opinion, there is possibly an opportunity here to because of the lack of volatility, which means the pricing of these options, especially out of the money and further out to expiration, a lot of the value in those is volatility driven. So there is the potential of, because of the lack of volatility, that these options might actually be priced low for what they're actually worth. But most people should not be even touching options, in my opinion. If you don't know anything, if you know very little about them, you should stay away from them because they can go to nothing. If you don't have a plan to get out of them, there's always a plan at the end when they expire, and likely they expire worthless. So just be aware of that. Quick little one here. This is a continuation of the last question. The question is, can they catch Mara, not MSTR? That's talking about GameStop. What do you guys think about that one?
How much does Mara have right now?
They have around 45,000, or sorry, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 46.
45. Yeah, 46,000 Bitcoin.
It's a lot of Bitcoin. And I don't know how much dollars in Bitcoin is that? What's the math?
Shit, I don't know.
I have no idea, but what I do know is that if GME were to do the entire 6 billion that they have currently, and this is assuming the price of Bitcoin does not move, if they did the entire 6 billion, they would have upward of like 50,000 plus, so that's what would happen if they did do it. So with that being said, Mara must have around $5 billion in BTC, right? And I think GameStop will actually pass them because Mara's overhead cost is just too high. Their operating cost is too high. And GME's operating cost is a lot lower. And they have the opportunity to generate cash with their business on top of being able to issue debt against their company more readily, more rapidly, and then generate Bitcoin yield more quickly. So I think that GME will be the second largest Bitcoin holding company in the world.
I agree. I agree with you there. I think Mara has basically paid for their operations through equity issuance, and they can't actually buy a lot of Bitcoin. They've run the Sailor playbook to some degree, but they can't actually buy all of the Bitcoin when they announce an ATM or a convertible bond because they have very expensive operations and they have to fund those operations. That's their core business. And they are able to get Bitcoin at a pretty decent rate, like well below average cost of mining. But again, it's just how likely are they to get Bitcoin and how long does it take for them to acquire that Bitcoin in that cheap way through mining it comparatively to buying it, because there's a little bit of a premium on buying it compared to mining it. But yeah, they if the average price was 90,000 and that's with GameStop probably pushing it up to that level, they could still acquire 50,000, which would put them in number 2 right away. So they're either going to get number 3 or number 2 pretty soon, in my opinion, and beat Mara out in the long term for the many of the reasons that Gen Z pointed out. They run a profitable business right now. Their debt structure is they have very little debt. They have a lot of room to grow in the Bitcoin strategy company.
I think you guys are just making a really good bull case.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right, rapid fire. Let's get out of here.
Okay.
Get rid of these last couple questions. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got 3 more minutes, everybody. And just a reminder to everyone watching, we're going to do this live show on Wednesdays now at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Wednesdays. So mark it down and be there. Okay, so a few questions here. Do you guys think IV goes crazy on GME once they acquire Bitcoin? Do you think the implied volatility of GameStop will go up when they buy Bitcoin?
Yes.
All right. I also agree. Opinions on saving in Bitcoin and spending in Monero. This person also said, hold on. This person also said, okay, you think so? Yeah, because they also said they were going to buy a bunch of the XRP ETF when it comes out.
Yeah, just buy Bitcoin, save in Bitcoin.
Spend Bitcoin too, if you want.
Spend Bitcoin.
Yeah, buy, spend, whatever. You don't need to use Monero. Like, are you a drug kingpin that needs to use some cryptocurrency that probably has an inflation bug built into it that we have no idea about? I don't think so.
Yeah, and the XRP thing, probably trolling. I don't know. Either way, there's just no need to spend in Monero. It's just not necessary.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was a continuation of the ETF conversation and exchange and stuff. WorkSafe Bitcoin here has a suggestion of River is a good option to mention for new Bitcoiners not ready for self-custody yet because of their proof of reserve feature. And this also kind of gets into some of the proof of reserve controversy. In my opinion, I was thinking about this earlier. I think MSTR stock would rip higher like crazy if they came out with proof of reserves, because I think a lot of people are really questioning their Bitcoin stack right now. What do you guys think about that?
My question is, what's the reason why Michael Saylor isn't providing proof of reserves?
I don't know.
I've heard him mention this in passing, and again, I'd have to go back. He has so many interviews that I watch, but one of them was just like, oh, well, some of the information is, I guess, proprietary in a way, and we don't want to disclose that we're custodying it with this exchange, this brokerage, and this company, and that's the reason why we don't do a proof of reserve. I don't think that's a great reason. Bitcoin is all about transparency, and to be fair, Michael Saylor is a pretty transparent guy. But I think that's something that he could do just to quell some of the fears of some people, because there's a theory going around that in a few years, we're going to come to find out that the ETFs, the companies, and a lot of these other public entities have a total Bitcoin holding that is greater than 21 million. And that, they're actually been paper Bitcoining for a long time now. I don't think that's true, but you can't really tell unless you're doing some proof of reserve stuff. So we'll see how it goes.
That said, though, if they did that and if they were issuing a lot of paper Bitcoin, that would be par for the course for the history of financial systems. So one of the big things I always say is the big point about self-custody is that you hold your own Bitcoin. You don't have to worry about other people lending out your Bitcoin or not having it, which constantly happens all the time throughout history. It happened a couple years ago with all of the Bitcoin companies. Just don't take that risk. Own it.
It is a risk that you're taking on. You have to be okay with that risk, and that's what's so great about Bitcoin is when you take it in self custody, you can audit it, you can see the supply, you can view your transaction, you can see it there on the blockchain, and yeah, I think that is my biggest qualm with MSTR is they don't show proof of reserves. Maybe it's some operational security reason that they're doing that. Like Gen Z said, they don't want to dox who's custodying it. I don't know why. To me, that doesn't seem like much of a risk. Maybe when more banks are able to custody Bitcoin, which they already are, they just need to build out the infrastructure. They will they'll diversify into the types of custodians they want to have and then show proof of reserves. I'm kind of hoping that they do eventually. And I think it would be really great if they do in the future.
Really quickly, at what point would it become actually concerning for you guys?
Again, I don't find it too concerning. I think Saylor has no incentive to not have the Bitcoin because he'd be getting scammed. He'd be getting ripped off, and then his company would go to zero. So that would be really bad. And again, like this guy says, there's SEC filing, there's audits, and again, the incentives just are not really aligned for Saylor, at least, to be creating paper Bitcoin. There might be incentives for people who are lending out Bitcoin or who are faking their holdings or whatever, but for Strategy, their entire business is predicated on the fact that they do hold Bitcoin. If that were not the case, they would go to zero almost instantly because they would have little to no value proposition beyond that.
Well, isn't their real business predicated on the fact that people think that they hold a Bitcoin, not the fact that they actually hold it? There's a very slight difference there, but it's pretty important.
Well, if the truth comes out and they don't have any Bitcoin, again, they will lose all their money. So they have every incentive to try to make sure that if it is a big lie, that it never gets out. But the easier thing to do, I think, is to just try to hold the Bitcoin. And I do think that's most likely what's happening. Also, really quick to touch on the River Financial thing. River Financial is not offered in every state in the US, which is insane. It's not offered in my state. Just wanted to put that out there. But I do think River is awesome.
Dang. Yeah, to answer your question, when would it worry me? It wouldn't worry me when people are speculating about Coinbase and paper Bitcoin and there's rumors of that or, people questioning it. It would worry me when there's news of it. So I guess I'm trusting and not verifying in this specific instance. And I'm just okay with that. I've just made my bed with that. And again, yeah, my positions in any of these Bitcoin proxies are only because I have money locked up into registered accounts and I can't buy actual Bitcoin with it. And any money that I have left over, I don't add to those registered accounts. I add it to self-custody Bitcoin because I believe that is the best thing to own. You're muted there, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to be clear, I do think that MicroStrategy has all the Bitcoin that they say that they have. I don't believe otherwise. And I agree with you that if I had money that was locked up and could not access Bitcoin, I would be investing in those proxies as well.
Yeah, nice. All right, guys. Well, that is an hour. We've gone an hour 5 here. Thanks everybody in the chat. We're going to do it again on Wednesday next week, not this Wednesday, next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Go check out Gen Z BTC on YouTube and check out Dan at Bitcoin Reactions on YouTube. And I'll post those in the description as well.
And
And
really
if anybody
quickly,
else had anything else.
I just want to make a quick plug. I started a new channel. I have one video up there. It explains why Bitcoin is valuable. It's a really awesome video. It's called Through the Cracks. Follow that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that too. That is a great video. I watched that this morning. It's about the money systems in prisons, which I thought was really cool. It was a great video. Good work on that, Dan. All right. Gen Z, you have anything to add or?
Nothing much. I will see you guys on the next episode. Remember, stack sats or die trying.
Love it. Love it. All right. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.